IO9 presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 32 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi, this is John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor of Lightspeed Magazine and Fantasy Magazine and several anthologies such as Wasteland, which is about life after the apocalypse, or Brave New World, which is about dystopian societies.
And I'm David Barr Kirtley. I'm the author of many short stories, including Blood of Virgins, about a surreal alternate world in which college students ride dragons. The story appeared in Realms of Fantasy magazine and is episode 88 of the Escape Pod podcast. And our guest today is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's the director of the Hayden Planetarium and a research associate in the Department of Astrophysics at the American Museum of Natural History. Since 2006, he's hosted the TV show Nova Science Now on PBS and has been a frequent guest on The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, and Jeopardy! Discover Magazine rated him one of the 50 best brains in science. Time Magazine voted him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And People Magazine rated him the sexiest astrophysicist alive. His most recent books are Death by Black Hole and Other Cosmic Quandaries and The Pluto Files, The Rise and Fall of America's Favorite Planet.
Doesn't it make you sad that no one ever votes on who's the sexiest science fiction writer or editor on the planet? I mean, we just get shafted on that all the time. I mean, they voted the sexiest astrophysicist alive? Really? Come on, we can surely some science fiction writers should get some love or something.
Well, I guess if people want to, vote for the sexiest science fiction writer, they can, post a comment on our episode.
All right, so let's get to our interview.
All right, so we're here with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Happy to be with you guys.
Okay, so first of all, just what are some of the recent developments in astronomy that have you the most excited?
In the recent weeks, I think the discovery by the Kepler telescope of 1,000 exoplanets, of which 40 to 50 of them are surely Goldilocks planets, I think is, for me, leads the news of the month. And these Goldilocks planets are, of course, of particular interest as we flesh out our portfolios of what other solar systems look like. Because, of course, that would be if you were ever to target planets in the search for life, that's where you would begin.
With these exoplanets, is it possible to use a telescope and look at them and say whether there are alien civilizations on them?
Well, so that's the first thought is, can you look close enough to see cities or any kind of evidence of intelligence, or at least some kind of evidence of life? And it turns out there's an entire cottage industry that has arisen, and it's in the world of astrobiology. And the exercise is to try to find biomarkers on exoplanets. And a biomarker isn't the direct evidence of life itself, but the indirect evidence of what life has done to the atmosphere or the surface of the planet. And for example, if you look at most science fiction stories that are told where people go jetting around the galaxy, they'll analyze the atmosphere of a planet and say, oh, this will sustain life. It has an oxygen atmosphere, and then they go land on it. Well, okay, that was then, but today, what we know is that if there is an oxygen atmosphere, it's not simply that it can sustain life as we know it, it's that life created that atmosphere. Oxygen itself is not stable over a given timescale. It's a highly reactive molecule, and in order for there to be oxygen stable in an atmosphere means there has to be life already there. So if we look into the atmospheres of these planets and find oxygen or methane or some other bit of chemistry that's unstable unless there's something pumping it into the system, then if you see it, you're left with no other conclusion than that there's some active biology going on the planet's surface.
I mean, that would tell you whether there was life or not, right? Would we have any way of knowing whether it was intelligent, sort of industrialized civilizations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, in my aging years, I've become more and more cynical of any definition we might put forth regarding what's intelligent out there. Because, of course, we define ourselves as intelligent. And And I ask myself, what even gives us that right to judge ourselves to be intelligent? Because we're coming up with our own definitions. And so, of course, we're going to look pretty good compared with other animals in the world. But you can imagine some species vastly more intelligent than we are, where why should we even think we have any hope of communicating with them? Consider that we haven't had a meaningful conversation with any other species of life on Earth with whom we have DNA in common. And take the chimp, for example, mere trifling difference in our DNAs, but you're not having extensive conversation with them about anything because by our measure, they're just too stupid to understand even our simplest thoughts. So I just imagine that same increment of intelligence to some other alien that could inhabit another planet, and we somehow believe we're going to have a conversation with it. Maybe their simplest of thoughts are, maybe we're just simply not smart enough to understand their simplest of thoughts any more than a chimp is smart enough to understand our simplest of thoughts. And if that's the case, they surely would not judge us to be intelligent. And so I've stopped even thinking about intelligence the way we always had traditionally thought about it. And I'm just looking for life at all. Life at all would be striking, would be extraordinary. And it would transform our understanding of modern biology. Because biologists today, as much as they like to celebrate biodiversity, fact is, at the end of the day, behind closed doors, they have to confess to themselves they only have a sample of one, because all life on Earth has common DNA. And if you have a sample of one, that's not the best scientific state you want to be in. You want to have multiple samples of things you can compare and contrast and find out what is fundamental to life and what is not. You cannot know that without having multiple examples of the phenomenon you're studying. So I think initially, given the prevalence of microorganisms throughout most of the history of the Earth, if we're going to find another planet that has life, you just do a random draw on when you land on the history of life on that planet. And if Earth is any measure, we're simply going to find microorganisms and not the intelligent life that we all seek or dream about in science fiction storytelling.
A recent article in the Journal of Cosmology prompted hundreds of people to declare themselves willing to volunteer for a one-way trip to Mars. What do you think about that?
The premise is, it's expensive to go to Mars, so let's only send you one way. If you have enough money to send someone to Mars, you have enough money to bring them back. When we run out of funding for big, expensive projects, it's rarely because you just miss it by a factor of 2, right? Or 3. You miss it by factors of 10s or hundreds. So sending people to Mars one way is not going to be the financially deciding factor about whether we go to Mars. So I think it's a false conversation. The real, more interesting question is, if our next spaceship to Mars, based on all measures of the technology, have a 40% chance that you will die on Mars because something's going to break down and we can't save you, now who still wants to go to Mars? That's the interesting case to address. And I think, yes, the line will be wrapped around the block multiple times. And you don't need the one-way scenario to still tease out of our population the bravest among us who will take that risk, because the return on that risk is so high, given that they may be the first to walk on Mars.
So one of your books is called Death by Black Hole. So what would actually happen if someone were to fly a spaceship into a black hole?
Yeah, you get ripped apart. It's a kind of fun way to die if you had to pick one. And it wouldn't just happen to your spaceship, it would happen to you and everything on board. The black hole is sufficiently small that you can get very close to its center before you even touch the surface of the object, whatever that surface is. And if you get close to the center of an object as a source of gravity, the higher and higher is the gravitational field in which you sit. Unlike Earth, you can't get closer than 4,000 miles to Earth's center, because Earth is 4,000 miles in radius. So there's a maximum amount that you could possibly weigh that's standing on Earth's surface. But if Earth shrunk, maintaining its mass, and you're on this surface of the Earth that's shrinking down with it, you're getting closer and closer to the center of the Earth. Your weight goes up. So as you descend to a black hole, it'll pull your feet faster than it'll pull your head as the rate of this gravitational force increases. And you begin to stretch, which is not ordinarily a problem. You know, everyone doesn't like a good stretch, but you'll learn that this is an unrelenting stretch. And the stretching forces then begin to exceed the forces that bind the molecules of your flesh, and then you snap into two pieces. And then the two pieces above and below, the snapping point would then stretch just as the original piece did, and they would snap into a pair of pieces. So you go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, and right on down. And so you get, and plus you not only that, you're getting funneled down through the fabric, the ever narrowing fabric of space and time. And that funneling, you're not only getting stretched head to toe, you're getting narrowed shoulder to shoulder. You combine these two effects, we have a word for that, and it's called spaghettification. Mm-hmm. And that's the art of dying by falling into a black hole.
So what would happen if you were to leave your ship without a spacesuit on? And are there any movies that have depicted that correctly?
A few have attempted it. And like take, for example, was it Mission to Mars, where the tether didn't reach far enough to get the guy, and he didn't want them to come save him. And it was his girlfriend or something. And then he flicked open his helmet so that he would on purpose die, so that they wouldn't all die trying to save him. And then his face just kind of, I don't know, it got really weird. Mummified face. It was the guy who was in Shawshank Redemption. What's the guy's name?
Tim Robbins?
Tim Robbins, yeah. So he, whichever Mars movie he was in, where, but it wouldn't happen that fast. People say, oh, space is cold. No, the only thing that makes something cold is all about the rate at which you lose energy, period. And so space is cold. So normally your 98.6 degree skin radiates to, it can radiate to the walls of your room, which is why some rooms feel really warm, because they're radiating back to you. The walls are radiating back to you. But if the air temperature is at some other temperature, higher or lower than your body temperature, the room will feel cold to you or warm to you. In space, it's all just radiative. So you will radiate your body heat into space, and there's no heat coming back to you. So you'll start feeling cold very quickly. But it's not like you're not going to freeze faster than if I dunked you in an icy lake where liquid 32-degree water is touching your skin. You'll be dead in 10 minutes or less. Okay? Because water absorbs heat. Liquids absorbs heat from your skin much faster than the vacuum of space will, the radiating into the vacuum of space. So you can survive the temperature. You can survive the cold. If you happen to be facing a star, then there's radiation coming at you from the star, and then you can overheat on that side. So what you really need to do is build a little rotisserie for your rotator, right? So you don't get too cold too fast, bring that round to the sun, and you're fine. Now there's the pressure problem. Your body will start to outgas. You have dissolved gases inside of your body fluids. So that won't be good. You'll get a bad case of the bends, basically. But that still takes a couple of minutes. The gases still have to sort of come out. They have to figure out that they're not being surrounded by a 1 atmosphere pressure. So really, the portrayal in the movie 2001 is probably the best. He held his breath. He had to come back through the pod bay, or whatever that the entry was that Hal didn't want him to come through. Dave, Hal will have to come through the airlock. That will be difficult without your helmet. And so he goes without, he doesn't have his helmet, right? So because he left quickly to try to retrieve his buddy and forgot to take his helmet. So he holds his breath, goes through, you work quickly, he's fine. He doesn't explode. He doesn't implode. He doesn't vaporize. He doesn't freeze instantaneously. And consider that it's only 1 atmosphere pressure difference between what you're used to in space. You can swim underwater and be under 2, 3, 4 atmospheres of water pressure. And you don't implode. Your body adjusts and adapts. It's fine.
So what are some of the other strangest, most unusual ways that people might die in outer space?
I got one for you. So how about we collide with another galaxy? Milky Way collides with another galaxy. Stars aren't going to collide. They're too far apart from each other. But you can feel each other's gravity. If a star gets a little too close to Earth, then that star's gravity could be stronger on us than our own lovely sun's gravity might be on us. If that's the case, you can have kind of a flyby looting of planetary populations by stars that went a little too close from one solar system to the next. And so that would be bad. Or if it doesn't steal us entirely, it could fling us off into a random other direction.
So do you think humanity will ever travel to the stars, or are the distances involved just too big?
No and yes. No, we'll never travel to the stars. Why? Yes, because the distances are too vast. When I say never, I mean not in even the remotest foreseeable future. That solution will not come technologically. It will have to come from some new understanding of the fabric of space-time continuum to exploit wormhole travel. The fastest spaceships we've ever built, if I put you on them, that fastest spaceship is the one going to Pluto right now, the New Horizons mission. That, by the way, it took the astronauts 3 days to get from Earth to the moon. That one, I think it took 6 hours or 9 hours, something. It was hauling. I put you on that spacecraft and sent you to the nearest star to the sun. Take 25, 30,000 years. Yeah, so give it up. And the nearest star that's interesting, that has an exoplanet, that is a Goldilocks planet, that would take you 70,000 years.
So have you read Carl Sagan's novel Contact, or seen the film? And if so, what did you think of them?
I've read half the novel and I've seen the whole film. I think it's a film. I think it's one of the best films of the decade in the 1990s. I put that one up there with Deep Impact in terms of a film that captures science as an enterprise, that captures the interaction of science with the general public. I'm a fan of all that was attempted in that storytelling, and it makes me even say maybe I might want to write a story of my own one day. But there's so many better science fiction storytellers out there that I don't feel it's an urge, but it's not some kind of inner commandment that I must follow.
So apparently there's a story about you talking to James Cameron about him getting the stars wrong in the movie Titanic.
Yeah. So I saw Titanic like everybody else. I saw it much later than when it was first run, much later, like 6 months later. It was still in the theaters. I played hooky one afternoon. Might have been 10 people in the theater. And I'm watching it, and then there's, the ship sinks, and the sky comes out, and Kate Winslet is on this plank looking up, and we know when this ship sank, and time of day, and longitude, latitude. We know what the sky looked like, and he had the wrong sky, and I was pissed off because I don't mind errors or oversights in movies. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to portray an element of me that's not true. What is true is if you're going to boast that your film is historically accurate, is accurate right on down to the wall sconces in the staterooms of the Titanic itself, then the least you can do is get the sky correct. So I sent him a note. I said, hey, you got this wrong. My finest stationery got ignored. Then I bumped into him in Pasadena one time. I explained to him about this, and then he was actually contrite and told me that the bad stuff happened in post-production where they put on the sky. So, okay, that's actually a good answer, but in my immaturity of apology, I wanted him to grovel at my feet, begging forgiveness for having messed up the sky. That's what I really wanted. It would not be until the next occasion that we were together, where he came to New York to receive an award from Wired magazine, where I brought it up again, thinking maybe I can get him to grovel this time. So that's when he said, oh, last I checked, Titanic has grossed more than $1 billion worldwide. So imagine how much more it would have grossed had I gotten the sky correct. And that just shut me up. My tail went between my legs, and now we were done. I said, I'm going to give up on this. Then a guy called me out of the blue and told me that first he said he works post-production for Jim Cameron. And so I said, whoa, okay. Because Jim had mentioned that the bad stuff happened in post-production. Then I wondered, did I get somebody in trouble? And he said, and he described the the fact that Jim wants to release a 10-year anniversary director's cut of the Titanic, and he was going to add some extra footage from around the bridge of the ship. And so this guy who works post-production was told by Jim to call me because I had a sky that he might be able to use. And then I felt quite triumphant at that point. And that was better than Cameron groveling. It was Cameron actually doing something to fix the problem. And so it is possible to affect some kind of change in the world.
Well, I mean, speaking of affecting change in the world, I mean, you've worked hard to promote scientific explanations over supernatural ones. I was wondering, do you ever hear from people who've changed their minds as a result of something you said? And what do you find is the best approach to doing that?
I spend much less time than you might think trying to get people to think scientifically instead of supernaturally. Most of my time is simply to boost people's science literacy. So in other words, when given the choice, I avoid debates with UFO people. I avoid debates with religious people. I avoid these encounters because then you're mudslinging at that point. I'd rather get people thinking straight to begin with. And in this way, they then become inoculated against pseudoscientific thought.
Okay, so what advances in astronomy and space exploration would you like to see happen in the next 50 years or so?
Oh, yeah, I'd like to go ice fishing on Europa, see if there's life swimming around in the undersea ocean. There's an ice sheet there because Europa is well outside of the Goldilocks zone of the solar system, and it only melts beneath it from the stress from the gravity of Jupiter and surrounding other moons. And so it's a liquid ocean. It's been liquid for billions of years. I want to go ice fishing there. I want to dig through the soils of Mars where there might be aquifers. Mars once had liquid running water rampant over its surface. It's now bone dry on the surface. The even money says that that same water is now beneath the surface in a kind of permafrost, but there might be sort of warm pockets from one place on Mars to the other. And if that's the case, it would have melted the ice and kept this sort of a warm kind of aquifer. And that's another place to look for life as well. So the next 30 to 50 years, I hope or expect to find life in the universe. And if not there, then in a biomarker in the atmosphere of a Goldilocks exoplanet, that it will continue to grow in the catalogs, given that we're only just beginning to analyze the data from the Kepler mission, a mission that is specifically tuned for finding exoplanets of about the mass of the Earth.
Okay, and are there any newer upcoming projects that you'd like to mention?
Just for your listeners, in case they're interested, I tweet the universe almost daily, cosmic tidbits, and I just tweeted Neil Tyson, Neiltyson. And just recently, I'm very proud, I'm host of a new radio show called Star Talk Radio. And you get all the details on startalkradio.net. But it's not the journalist interviewing a scientist. It's me, the scientist, interviewing pop culture figures drawn from society. We explore ways that science has influenced their lives. And so it just takes a different turn on how you bring science down to earth. So, guys, thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, that should work for you?
Yep, that's great.
Yep, great.
Okay, guys, keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
Right,
Okay,
bye.
bye.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Neil deGrasse Tyson for joining us on the show. All right, so the first thing we want to mention is that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is now sponsored by Audible.com. You know, if you listen to very many podcasts, you're probably familiar with what the deal is. But basically, if you go to audiblepodcast.com/geeksguide and sign up for a trial subscription, they'll give us some cash. So, we would really appreciate it if people would do that. I mean, I think we're both big customers of Audible.com and have been for many years. I think I've bought, probably over 100 books from them, with my own money and everything. I've always had a good experience with all the books I've bought. So we're happy that they're interested in sponsoring the podcast. And, we hope people will go check them out.
Yeah, it's actually a great way for you to support the show if you're interested because, we're going to get paid by Audible if you sign up for a free trial, but then you're actually getting something directly in return for it. Whereas, if you were going to donate money to us via PayPal or whatever, it would just be donation. So this is sort of a way of donating to us and you also get something in return. But yeah, actually, I mean, what you're saying about Audible being great for audiobooks, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's actually so convenient that I was actually receiving a bunch of free audiobooks in the mail, like from traditional publishers. So I was getting them on CD-ROM, and because I reviewed audiobooks and whatnot, and so. But because it's so much of a pain to to rip an audiobook on CD and put it on your iPod, I actually was still spending money at Audible buying stuff just because it was convenient to put it on my iPod. And really, that, I mean, once you listen to audiobooks that way, that's the only way to do it. Because it's like it remembers your place and it's all on the one little device. You don't have to carry around like a box of CDs and everything. So yeah, I mean, it's great. And actually, I mean, I've been reviewing for audible.com for a while here lately too. So, and I've mentioned on the show a couple of the audiobooks that I read and really enjoyed. So you can actually go to audible.com and look up my name, and you can find all the different audiobooks that I reviewed and thus recommended.
And, so it's audiblepodcast.com/geeksguide, or you can just go to our website at geeksguideshow.com and just click on the ads there for audible.com, and that'll take you to the page where you sign up.
And we'll have a link in the show notes too.
All right, but so our first topic for today is, speaking of aliens and stuff, there's this new alien movie that came out called I Am Number 4, and I went and saw this dumb movie.
Thanks for taking for the team, dude.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. The best review I saw is this guy, Eric Childress, and he says, I am number 4 indeed, because this is a movie that just took 2 gigantic dumps on my brain. Yeah, so I mean, it's not really worth seeing. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't really expecting it to. It's actually better than I was expecting it to be. But still not worth seeing. But sort of the reason I was interested in going and checking it out is because I had read this article about sort of some of the story behind the story, and that's actually kind of interesting. So there was this article by Suzanne Moses in New York Magazine titled James Frey's Fiction Factory, and this I Am Number 4, it's based on a novel that sort of came out of this weird collective writers thing he's putting together. We'll have more to say about that in just a bit. Yes, I mean, if you don't know who James Frey is, he's this guy. A couple of years ago, he published this memoir, A Million Little Pieces, that was ostensibly about his sort of crazy life of crime and drugs and addiction and recovery and stuff. And he was on Oprah, and the book was a big bestseller. And then people started investigating this crazy life story, and it turned out that he had exaggerated quite a lot of it. Here's sort of the key section from Wikipedia. They say, the smoking gun alleged that Frey had never been incarcerated and that he greatly exaggerated the circumstances of a key arrest detailed in the memoir, hitting a police officer with his car while high on crack, which led to a violent melee with multiple officers and an 87-day jail sentence. In the police report that the smoking gun uncovered, Frey was held at a police station for no more than 5 hours before posting a bond of a few $100s for some minor offenses. The arresting officer, according to the smoking gun, recalled Frey as having been polite and cooperative.
So not high on crack and didn't over a cop with his car. Well, that sounds pretty similar, actually.
So, I mean, this whole story broke. I was in grad school at the time, and man, for months, it seems like it was all anyone could talk about. It was this huge story. And it sort of led to this whole sort of domino effect of people looking into memoirs and finding out that they were exaggerated or made up or whatever, and that memoirs had just become such a hot selling genre that people were just basically publishing books that they couldn't sell as novels that were really novels, were just kind of being packaged as memoirs and sold that way. And but anyway, after all this came out, Frey was sort of went back on Oprah and was browbeaten, and then his agent dropped him and his publisher dropped him, and so this is sort of he's reappeared now with this sort of I guess he's been going around to like MFA programs in Manhattan and sort of offering to sign people up to write commercial sort of by design highly commercial novels for him. So the woman who wrote this article that I mentioned, Suzanne Moses, she was actually a student in one of these MFA programs at Columbia. And so he came to her class, and she sort of talks about her experiences when he came to her class, and from talking to the other students and stuff. And so the guy who wrote this I Am Number 4 novel was a guy who was also from the Columbia MFA program. And let's see if I can find the.
Are you going to say you're going to try to find the guy's name, because it certainly isn't on the book anywhere?
Yeah, the book, by the way, it's sort of putatively a collaboration between Frey and this guy, but it was published under a pseudonym. But the quote I was looking for is the article says, Frey believed that Harry Potter and the Twilight series had awakened a ravenous market of readers and were leaving a substantial gap in their wake. He wanted to be the one to fill it. There had already been wizards, vampires, and werewolves. Aliens, Frey predicted, would be next. I mean, so that's basically what I Am Number 4 is. It's like Twilight, except with aliens instead of vampires. And so that's the idea he gave to this guy. Toby Hughes is the author's name, this MFA student. And so he wrote the book and was signed to a really sort of exploitative contract, at least according to this article. I'll read you what it says. It says, Hughes wrote the novel without any compensation and signed a contract without consulting a lawyer that specified that he would receive 30% of all revenue that came from the project. The book would be published under a pseudonym, and the contract stipulated that Hughes would not be allowed to speak publicly about the project or confirm his attachment to it. There was a $250,000 penalty Frey could invoke if Hughes violated his confidentiality terms. I don't know, I guess, some people listening might not be that familiar with the publishing industry and sort of what a normal book contract looks like. So maybe, John, do you want to just sort of explain what a standard book contract usually sort of looks like?
Yeah, well, I mean, typically in a book contract, the author is going to get full credit for their work. And, it's up to them whether or not they want to use their real name, but, they'll be the credited author of the work. They have, it's up to them whether or not they're going to write sequels to the work, and you're going to receive all of the royalties for the work, not just 40% of the royalties, or 30% or whatever it was. And so, yeah, I mean, for a novel, typically you would get, like around $5,000 or whatever is a typical sort of first novel advance. Typical publishing agreement, leaves most of the rights with the writer too. And certainly there's not going to be any sort of legal agreement that prevents you from talking about being the author of the work or whatever, which seems pretty ridiculous. But
yeah, well, I mean, there are also work for hire things, right? Like, could you talk about why there's this difference between work for hire and creator owned?
Yeah, I mean, work for hire agreements are very much, they're sort of conceived in the same way as what you're talking about with Frey's agreement, except that they're typically not going to be as exploitative as that. I know a lot of work for hire agreements, do sort of treat the author, less well than they probably deserve. But they're going to get paid a flat fee up front, and often that's all they get. They'll just get the flat fee, and that's it. But the flat fee is usually fairly good. It's going to be probably 5 figures somewhere along there, depending on what the property is and who the author is and whatever. And sometimes that's all they get, and they don't get any share of the royalties. But I know I've heard for some the more recent books, people that I know that have done recent tie-in work, they said that they are getting a cut of the back end. So they're getting royalties as well. So yeah, I mean those are going to vary a lot. Typically you would do a work for hire agreement and have it be structured so that the author isn't getting the same share they would get if they were publishing something that they created themselves, is because, well, it's like, they didn't create the property, and they're just working with someone else's characters. And so the owner of those rights has to get a taste of some of the proceeds. So that's why they're usually structured that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I wanted to bring up, is that in a work for hire agreement, it's not typically something that the author came up with, right? Like if you're writing a Star Wars novel or something, obviously you're not going to get intellectual property rights to the Star Wars characters. You're being hired by someone to write, using their existing intellectual property. But it seems like in this case, basically, it's sort of that kind of contract, but for a book that this guy essentially wrote the whole thing himself. I mean,
yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, it's like Frey gave him the idea or whatever, from what we can tell from this article. But it's like giving someone an idea for a book is not writing the book. It's not creating the intellectual property, like you say. So yeah, I mean that's that's a big difference between the standard work for hire agreement and what is happening here.
Although I mean it does sound like this from this article anyway. It sounds like Toby Hughes did pretty well financially. There's a quote. It says, rumors had indeed been racing all over the program about Hughes. Frey had paid off his debt and was promoting him as a rising talent. Hughes was flying to L.A. to meet Spielberg. He had bought his mother's house and an apartment in the Village. He was a multimillionaire. That's what we heard anyway. The article doesn't go on that I noticed to go on to say whether any of those rumors were true or not. But it's at least, a strong possibility, it seems, that financially it worked out pretty well. But certainly the article suggests that Hughes was not very happy in the end with the deal that he'd signed.
I expect it's going to work out pretty well for him in the end because since it has gotten out that he is the author of that book, I mean, I'm sure he could probably work that to his advantage and get an actual deal under his own name now, doing something else, whether it's sort of YA-ish genre fiction or whatever. He's got some profile now, whereas before he didn't have anything. He was just another MFA student. So, I don't know that he can complain too much. I think it probably worked out okay.
But, I mean, the part of the article that really sort of struck me and made me curious to actually go see the movie was this part. It says, this agent began circulating the manuscript as an anonymous collaboration between a New York Times bestselling author and a young up-and-coming writer. Publishing houses weren't certain how to respond. Then in June 2009, a bidding war ignited for the film rights between J.J. Abrams and a joint proposal from Steven Spielberg and Michael Bay. Spielberg and Bay won for a reported high six-figure deal. This in turn sparked publishing interest, and HarperCollins won the book rights. Together, Frey and Hughes signed a 4-book deal. Rights to I'm Number 4 have since been sold in 44 countries, and at last count, it's been translated into 21 languages. So, like I said, I wasn't really expecting the movie to be good, but that did kind of just make me curious, because it made me wonder if there wasn't something there, some interesting idea or, angle or something that is what inspired the bidding war and everything. So I went to see this movie and I sure didn't see anything like that. I'm completely mystified why this story would have sparked a bidding war. It really seems like if you could just pick any 14-year-old boy in the country and ask him to come up with a story, and this book is essentially what he would come up with. The story, I guess, if you don't know, is that there's some aliens living on Earth, and they're the last survivors of a sort of eradicated species, and a couple of them, I think 9, are sort of destined to develop superpowers, and they're being killed off one by one by the evil aliens that slaughtered their race. And the main character is Number 4, and at the beginning of the story, he learns that Number 3 has just been killed, and so he's next. And he's like a teenager, and so he's always moving around to try to stay one step ahead of the aliens who are coming after him. So he moves to this small town and enrolls in high school and meets a girl and skirmishes with jocks and develops superpowers and then fights aliens. So I mean, it's nothing you haven't seen a million times before. I guess I was just gonna mention. Well, there's sort of one kind of cool thing is that there was these monsters at the end. They sort of look like a cross between a velociraptor and a flying squirrel. Those were kind of cool. That was actually the only thing really I liked in the movie. But I was just gonna mention sort of like 2 of the things that irritated me the most, because I mean it's a mildly entertaining movie, but there's just like the lack of internal consistency and logic is just really, really annoying. And so there's not really any reason why he enrolls in high school. I mean, they're trying to keep a low profile, and so he has kind of this guardian guy who just wants him to hide out, and the kid insists on enrolling in high school because he's bored, and so he wins the argument, and it doesn't make any sense at all. And I'm kind of like, geez, if I could like run through the woods like this kid does, doing crazy backflips and stuff, and like shoot energy out of my hands, and sort of I think I would spend my days training to fight the aliens who are going to come kill me, that would decide the fate of the planet. Seems like all that would be, I wouldn't be like, that stuff's all boring, I think I'm going to go sit through algebra class. That'll be a lot more interesting.
The same problem with in Twilight with the vampires going to high school, right? I mean, like, why the hell would they do that? They're immortal, and they're like several hundred years old. Or maybe there wasn't high school when they were actually teenagers, and so it's novel to them or something. I still, it doesn't make any sense.
Have you actually read Twilight?
No, I've seen the movie though.
Oh, all right. See, I haven't read the book or seen the movie, so I can't really comment on that.
Horrible. It's so horrible. I actually so I wanted to see it because I had this opinion of it from having heard about it, but I wanted to see it for myself. And I was asking my friends, and I asked Twitter, and I said, well, should I just try to watch it by itself, or should I watch it with the riff tracks? You know what that is? Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So riff tracks is like basically it's like Mystery Science Theater 3000. I mean, with the same guys who did that. Mike Nelson and some of the others, I guess. It's like Mystery Science 3000, except that it's just like a little MP3 file that you download, and then you can play it. You play it along at the same time as you're watching the movie, and you just sync it up, and then that way, like, you're watching it with basically Mystery Science Theater 3000 playing in the background. And they make fun of the movie and everything. So even with that, it was pretty hard to watch, I have to say. And I mean, that certainly helped, because then there was some mockery to help it go down easier. But it's pretty terrible.
But the other thing in I'm Number 4 that really bothered me was that that his Guardian guy has kind of some sort of computer program that erases photos of him from the internet, so that whenever somebody takes his photo, it just like goes out onto the web and erases it to make him harder to track. But then the girl that he falls for is this photographer, and so she takes all these pictures of him, and he looks at her website and sees that she's taken all these pictures of him, and he's really touched. But then they all sort of blink out one by one as the algorithm goes to work deleting them, and then it never, and so you're expecting then the next time he sees her, she's going to be like, hey, every time I take your picture, it gets deleted from my website. That's kind of strange, isn't it? And it never gets brought up again. It's just like one of those things where like nothing in the world fits together. And like they have like these swords, kind of like they have these swords with sort of glowing pommels, and some of the characters are just sort of holding them in some scenes, but they never really do anything in the story or anything. And it was kind of funny that there was this article. In this article I mentioned, there was a quote where they say, the author says, Frey encouraged me to start imagining product placement. Quote, think Happy Meals, because merchandise is where you make money in these deals. He mentioned the Mogadorian swords in I'm Number 4, which were described with unusual specificity. Quote, we added that after Spielberg told us you needed stuff to sell. So yeah, I guess sort of if what you're saying about Twilight is true, that they actually did a pretty good job of making Twilight with aliens.
Right.
I don't know. I do actually. I recommend people go read this article, because I think you'll be a lot more entertained by it than you will by the movie. All right, but so I mean, the next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of that when we interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson, he was sort of talking about how he was sort of thinking that probably out there are aliens that are just so much more intelligent than we are, that we wouldn't be able to understand their simplest thoughts, and that it would be like the relationship between a chimpanzee and us would be like the relationship between us and these aliens. And I've kind of been thinking about that because it's sort of a common idea in science fiction, the idea of just incomprehensibly superior alien races and things. And I've never been quite sure if I believe that or not. The sort of the totally incomprehensible part. I'm reminded, one time I was at a convention and I was talking to this guy about a book, and he said it was about incomprehensible aliens. And so I sort of asked him a little bit more about what the story was. And he said that, in the story, Earth is at war with this alien race, and they just seem to be aggressive, and we don't understand why they're at war with us or why they're attacking us. But then it turns out that the aliens have this religion, that they're the only intelligent life in the universe. And so like any other species that kind of acts in an intelligent seeming way is just like blasphemous to them, and they feel like they have to eradicate it. And so when he said that, I'm like, well, wait a minute,
yeah,
that's perfectly comprehensible,
Right.
And
what book that was, or?
I think it might have been called The Dark Wing or something like that. but I don't know. I didn't read the actual book. It was just this conversation I had. But it seems like every or most anyway, conversations I have with people about incomprehensible aliens, it always turns out that they actually are comprehensible, basically. It's just that there's a big difference between, an aliens that we don't understand and aliens that we can't understand, and that most aliens turn out to be aliens that we don't understand rather than aliens that we can't understand. And I'm just not sure I believe that there are aliens whose motivations are completely incomprehensible to us at any level of simplification or abstraction, because sort of any aliens have to deal with the same basic reality that we do. Neil deGrasse Tyson was sort of talking about how chimpanzees can't understand our simplest thoughts. And I know what he means, right? But sort of when I was listening back to that, it sort of occurred to me, well, my simplest thoughts are like, I'm hungry, or I'm tired or whatever. And certainly a chimpanzee can understand those kinds of thoughts, that basically any evolved organism will understand those basic sorts of, facts of being a living organism. And, that when we look at essentially any animal behavior, there may be, I don't know if there probably are animal behaviors that we still don't understand, but I don't know if I believe that there are any animal behaviors that we just can't understand. And so I think the question is, isn't that, are there aliens who are smarter than us? Because, there almost certainly are. But I sort of think that the issue is kind of like, if you go up in intelligence from where we are, is there stuff to understand in terms of motivations and things like that aren't accessible to us at all? And it seems like the biggest difference between animals and us in terms of like not comprehending motivations would be like moral reasoning. I was thinking about how like lions, right? There'll be like the top lion and he's got all the females and they're all having his cubs. And then a younger lion will come along and kill that male lion and take his place and then kill all the cubs. And I don't think the lions ever think about, like, is that the right thing to do or not? They don't have those kinds of brains. But it seems like, right, we're evolved that animals have to be able to sort of think about what other animals are thinking, or, to sort of predict what they're going to do. So, like, if there's a lion chasing me and, I think, like, what's he going to do? How can I hide from him? Stuff like that. And so as your brain evolves and gets more complicated in terms of being able to think about what other animals are thinking, you eventually get to a stage where you can model the minds of other animals well enough to start to wonder, well, how does that animal feel, feel about what I'm doing to it? And that's where you sort of get this sort of moral reasoning. So our motivations can change a lot at that stage. But then I think the question is like, is there anything in the nature of moral reasoning or philosophy or things like that above sort of what we can currently comprehend? One thing I wonder about is, we have all of these sort of moral disagreements in our society, and I sort of wonder if someday some aliens might land and just settle them for us. Say the liberals are right or the conservatives are right. Trust us, we're 1,000 times more intelligent than you are. Is that possible? Or do aliens who are 1,000 times as intelligent as we are, would they still be having the same sorts of disagreements because they're not actually disagreements that can be solved by just more intelligence or more facts or whatever? So, I have no doubt. You look at things that are smarter than people or more intelligent than people in particular areas, right? Like, I don't know, like there was just this Watson computer that was on Jeopardy and just, slaughtered all the humans at playing Jeopardy. And so I just sort of, I can imagine aliens who are more intelligent than us and having perfect recall or a much faster command of facts, or, they can do extremely complicated math very quickly in their heads, things like that. But, like Watson, I can't do obviously what that computer can do. No human can, but it's not beyond human comprehension, right? Like the humans who designed it understand perfectly well what it's doing,
Yeah, I don't know. I think if an alien race was so far advanced that we would have trouble comprehending them, like I think they would probably be smart enough to be able to make themselves comprehensible. You know what I mean? Like they'd be able to explain stuff to us in such a way that we'd be able to understand. It just seems like that any alien race that was so far advanced, they'd be able to figure out a way to communicate with us. I mean, we might not be able to communicate with them if they didn't want to communicate with us, but coming from their point of view, I'm sure they'd be able to figure out a way.
That was another thing I was thinking about, is that Neil deGrasse Tyson was sort of saying, well, maybe we're so dumb that, they just don't want to talk to us because, we have nothing interesting to say. But I was kind of thinking, like, by analogy, if they're more advanced, if they're as advanced above us as we are above chimps or whatever, like, people still talk to chimps and other animals, right? I mean, and often prefer talking to their cat or their dog or whatever, as opposed to talking to other people, because there's just something sort of endearing about their simplicity. So I wonder if, even if there were, vastly superior aliens, they still might want to talk to us for a similar reason, that they just thought we were cute or something. Or,
I mean, I think it's a very natural thing, at least for humans, to sort of seek intelligence in other living creatures, and to to attribute human qualities to other animals, and to find sort of similarities with us in them. Who's to say if that's actually a natural thing like that all living things experience, or, if it's just sort of a human tendency. I mean, I don't know I'm sure there must have been studies about animals and doing that kind of behavior. I don't know if they do, like, if you put a chimp and a dog in an enclosed area, and they, would they be friends? Like dogs and humans would be friends.
Seems like on the news you always see there's a story about somebody's parrot is friends with the cat, or the cat is nursing the mice or something.
True, that's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but again, it's hard to say if that's, a product of life on Earth, or if it's a sort of a natural thing that, like, any alien species would do. But I don't know. I think that most, I kind of see curiosity as a side effect of intelligence. So, I don't know that you could get to be this supremely intelligent alien race and not be curious about, the world or universe that you live in. And I mean, if you discover that there's this other race that appears to be intelligent, but I think that it would be by any alien race's metric, we would have to be seen as somewhat intelligent, because we built a bunch of stuff and we changed our planet, and we've done all this stuff. That obviously there's a complex mind at work. So I think if they discovered us, then they would want to at least study us, if not make contact. And I could see how if they witness us from afar, or see any of the TV signals that we've been beaming out into space for generations, they might be hesitant about making contact because we seem dangerous and warlike. But I certainly think they would be curious about us at the very least.
Yeah, it seems like, you sort of were asking, like, is the instinct that makes a person want to go up to a cat and say, oh, hey, kitty, 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 and talk to it, even though it's not understanding what you're saying? Is that a universal sort of instinct? And, it may not be, but it seems like it's fairly likely that it's at least fairly common among social animals, as opposed to solitary animals or whatever. And it seems to me that non-social aliens are unlikely to create the sorts of civilizations, that would be exploring the galaxy or whatever. It seems like you just need a certain amount of cooperation and sociability to produce that kind of endeavor,
Actually, that reminds me of, like, one of my favorite examples of science fiction that deals with trying to communicate with an alien species is this novel Starplex by Robert Sawyer. And it's sort of just one part of a grander story, but there's these dark matter entities in the book, and there's this great scene where they're like trying to figure out how to communicate with them, and just like the sort of ingenuity of like trying these different forms of communication to like how do you communicate with something like this, like what's universal and that kind of thing. And so, like, I always find that really interesting when you can come up with that kind of scenario that I haven't seen. Like, it's like a familiar scenario that I've seen before, but it was done in such a way that it was like, oh wow, this is really interesting, and I haven't seen it done this way before.
Well, I mean, you sort of alluded to this like TV sci-fi phenomenon where the aliens all look like human beings, except they have funny noses or ears or whatever. And I mean, obviously they do that on TV just for practical reasons. But that was something else that was bugging me in this I Am Number 4 movie, is that it's just sort of passes without comment that the aliens look exactly like human beings. Sure, that was okay, for Superman, 80 years ago or whatever, but I just don't think it's acceptable in science fiction right now to just have this presumption that aliens would pass unnoticed in human society, just because that's what they look like. That just strikes me as so outlandish. And, it would be another thing if they have disguises or, they were engineered to look like us or something like that. But, I mean, I think that maybe we need to draw a distinction between evolved organisms and sort of technologically created intelligences, right? I have a little trouble believing that evolved organisms could be that incomprehensible to us. It may be that once they start genetically engineering themselves or, melting with technology or whatever, that they become something far stranger. But I don't know. I just keep coming back to this issue of, I don't think that logic is specific to one planet. It just seems like no matter how smart something is, there are just certain basic ground rules about what reality is that would allow us, like aliens might be like sucking energy out of black holes in a way that we can't understand, but we can understand at some level of abstraction or simplification that like there's a resource that they need and they're getting it and that's why they're doing this or something like that. I have a hard time imagining what sort of thing there could be that couldn't be abstracted that way. And obviously it's a bit futile to talk about because obviously we can't come up with an example of something that's beyond our comprehension, right? I mean, I was sort of thinking about like what are some of the limits of the human imagination. And I mean, like the best example that sort of comes to mind is that we can't think in more than 3 dimensions. That, you can't imagine a 4-dimensional, an object that exists in 4 spatial dimensions. It's just sort of hardwired into the human minds to think in 3 dimensions. And that's sort of, something that maybe aliens or some sort of more advanced intelligence could conceptualize that we can't. But that still doesn't touch on motivations, I think there's also just the issue of like how much more intelligence does you any good. We're getting to the point where a person of fairly low intelligence who has access to Google could produce whatever information is necessary just as well as some super intelligent person with access to Google. And so it may just be that there's sort of a ceiling on how useful intelligence is, that you get to a certain point, and as long as you have access to computers, that you yourself, the organism itself being any more intelligent beyond that point just isn't of any practical value. All right, but so moving on to our next topic. We were just going to talk about some science fiction stories that deal with astronomy and stars and black holes and stuff like that. And so the first story I wanted to mention it's called Inconstant Moon by Larry Niven. Sort of the setup of the story is there's this guy and he's just sort of in his apartment one night and he suddenly notices that the moon has just grown unbelievably bright. And he realizes that what this means is that the sun has gone nova and, has fried everyone on the day side of the planet. And that as the planet rotates, the far side of the Earth is going to be fried as well. And so essentially, this is the last night on Earth. And, so he calls up his girlfriend and, tries to not give away what's going on, but sort of have a fun last night together. And there's just all sorts of this is a story that it's just really made by the scientific detail. There are just great scientific details in it. So like his girlfriend has a telescope and sort of watches the stars. And so it turns out that she's actually figured out what's going on too. And that she had noticed the moon becoming very bright and sort of had the same thought that he did. But then she looked at Jupiter and noticed that Jupiter wasn't any brighter. And so then, if the sun has gone nova, then obviously Jupiter should be lit up too. So maybe something else was going on. But then, she realizes that it takes longer for the light to get to Jupiter than to the moon. And so, when she looks again, Jupiter is now lit up too. And so just stuff like that is there's just like great details like that in the story.
I mean, that reminds me of the another classic story, Nightfall by Isaac Asimov. I mean, it's been years since I read it, but I'll try to sort of talk about it a little bit. But basically, it's set in this world where I believe there's like multiple stars or multiple sources of light anyway, and so there's like never any darkness on this planet. And so, but then an eclipse happens, which had like never happened or whatever in the civilization's history, and so they just like completely freak out, and thus the title Nightfall. But I always thought that was really clever and cool, because it's like I mean, that's like imagine that, like if you lived in this world where there never was darkness, and then all of a sudden there was suddenly darkness out of nowhere. You can see how that would really freak everyone out. But I'm sure you've read Nightfall, right?
Yeah. And actually, we talked about that back in episode 7 when we were talking to Steve Ely of Escape Pod, and he was talking about, they actually ran that. I think it's episode 100 of Escape Pod. So if people are interested in that story, you could go and listen to it, right now on Escape Pod. I mean, another one I wanted to mention was this other Larry Niven story. It's called Neutron Star, and this is set in his known space universe, which is just it's sort of this linked series of books and stories, and it's just really, really fun. But so in this story, he has sort of this continuing character named Beowulf Schaefer, and as the story opens, Beowulf Schaefer, he's sort of a starship pilot or something, and the company that he worked for has collapsed, and so he's $500,000, they call him stars, in debt. And once his creditors figure this out, he's going to get tossed in debtor's prison, which has made a comeback in this future. So as he's trying to figure out what he's going to do, this alien comes to him with a proposal, and this is just one of the coolest alien species that anyone's come up with for science fiction. They're called puppeteers, and they kind of look like, I don't know, sort of like 3-legged horses, I guess, with just sort of one leg in the back, and then instead of a head, they have 2 long necks, and then each neck has a head on it, but the heads are these kind of like small weird things, and the brain is actually in the chest kind of area, I guess you would say. So the heads don't have any brains in them, but they can both sort of talk and look around, and the mouths are very agile, and so they they don't have hands, they just do everything they manipulate objects and stuff all with their mouths. But so anyway, so this puppeteer, comes up to the main character and says that that they've discovered they found the first neutron star that's been discovered in this universe, and they had sent some explorers to go take readings of it, and the explorers had been torn apart, and the puppeteers, their spaceships are supposed to be completely indestructible and completely immune to any sort of energy or magnetism or whatever. And so this could be bad for business if it gets out that people were harmed somehow using one of their ships. And so they want him to repeat the expedition and try to figure out what's going on. And he sort of gets blackmailed into doing this. So he ends up, as the story opens, he's sort of flying down toward this neutron star, knowing that something's going to try to kill him. So it's just a really fantastic story. Although there's something about the story that's bugged me ever since I read it when I was a kid, and that's that there's some natural, there's some real life phenomena attributable to neutron stars. That's the explanation. But it's always sort of bugged me, because I just can't believe that if Larry Niven, sitting in his study, can realize that neutron stars have this property and build a story around it, that people hundreds of years in the future and aliens who actually build spaceships and fly around and stuff, wouldn't have thought of this. And I mean, there's a little bit in the story to try to justify that, but it's just something that kind of irks me. Is I just don't believe that spacefaring civilizations wouldn't have thought of the kind of stuff in this story. Don't they read any science fiction, for one thing?
Well, that's a problem with a lot of science fictional concepts. It's like, well, gee, if they had just read any science fiction, they would have surely figured this out.
Yeah.
So another story I wanted to talk about, there's a short story I published in Lightspeed called Infall by Ted Kosmatka. It's in the December issue. And so that one was a pretty interesting use of black holes. In that one, there's a backdrop of some sort of religious war conflict thing going on Earth. But then in order to make somebody talk, they take them up into a spaceship, and they're going like towards a black hole. And the idea being that, like, he would never get his reward in the afterlife by dying, because, if they plunge him into the black hole, then, he'll sort of be like trapped forever on the black hole, and he'll like never actually die. And so it was sort of a clever way of getting around the whole religious idea that, I torture can't harm me because, I'll get my reward in the afterlife, sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's actually, the last thing I was going to mention. It's sort of built around a similar idea, but it's Gateway by Frederick Pohl, and this is it's set in a universe where humans are sort of exploring outer space, and we find this abandoned alien space station, and there are just all these ships, but and just nobody can figure out why the aliens who built this place have vanished. But so each of the ships is kind of programmed to make a hyperspace jump and to come back, but nobody knows where any of the ships are programmed to go. And so it's sort of like this game of Russian roulette where people sign up to make a jump and come back and try to bring back technology and artifacts and stuff like that. And a certain number of the ships just don't ever come back, and, nobody ever finds out why. But so the actual plot is that there's one of these guys who signs up for these jobs. Something horrible has happened on his last trip, and he's all sort of psychologically messed up about it. And so he's sort of going through these counseling sessions with this sort of robotic therapist. And so as he's sort of talking to this robotic therapist, sort of the story emerges, and the sort of the climax involves, the horrible thing that's happened to him involves a black hole and sort of some of the sort of odd properties of the black hole.
When we were prepping this show, I was thinking about what things I would talk about in this segment, and I had a couple different anthologies that's just sort of, without mentioning the stories specifically in there, but just sort of mentioning the anthologies as a whole. There's a couple by Byron Price. One's called Universe, and it has Isaac Asimov, Greg Benford, Ben Bova, Ray Bradbury, all those major science fiction writers like that, and so they all write stories about some sort of astronomical phenomenon. There's stuff about quasars, there's stuff about starbirth, there's stuff about supernovas and that kind of thing. And but then also there's essays written by scientists. So it's actually kind of like Lightspeed, where you have a story and then you have the articles sort of talking about some concept in the story, and so it's a pretty interesting anthology. And then he also has one called Planets, which is basically it's like a tour through the solar system. And so you have a story about Venus. You have you start with Mercury, go to Venus, then Earth, then Mars, and all the way out. And back then Pluto was still a planet, so there's a story about Pluto too. And it's the same deal where there's also articles by scientists. And actually, there's another book sort of like that one without the articles. There's a whole series of anthologies that they're just like collections of stories from Asimov Science Fiction magazine, and so it's called like Isaac Asimov's Solar System. And it's like it has a story for each planet in the solar system, and but they're all stuff that was published in Asimov's. Actually, that reminds me, there was a great story in Asimov's after this anthology came out, but like in a couple of years ago. So there was a story called Shepherded by Galatea by Alex Irvine, and it was this story about like mining on one of the moons of Neptune or something like that, and that was just like that was a really interesting story. I mean, it's been a while now, so I can't really remember the details, but I mean, it's some sort of crazy SF no mining story on one of the moons of Neptune. So, I mean, if you like sort of astronomical SF, anything would be something to definitely check out. And actually, it was kind of a surprise, like, because I've read Alex Irvine stuff before, and I didn't know that he was capable of writing something so hard SF, because it's like totally hard SF. And actually, now that I think of it, actually, I should mention, I went to this workshop for writers and editors last summer called Launchpad, and it was funded by the National Science Foundation, and now it's funded by NASA, I believe. It's run by this astronomer and SF writer named Mike Brotherton, and so it's basically a workshop to teach writers and editors real science, so that when they write science fiction stories, or in my case, edit science fiction stories, we can help have real science be in the story, so that that sort of behooves NASA, because then like people they see the possibilities in science fiction or whatever, and they see that, oh, well, actually some of this stuff will actually be real. Whereas if everybody has terrible science, then that's not necessarily helping them. But anyway, so Mike Brotherton, actually, he did an anthology that's online called Diamonds in the Sky. And if you Google it, or we'll have a link in the show notes to it, there's just a website for it. And so basically, it was some sort of science funded anthology, and the idea being that all of the science in the stories is spot on, and it's all about astronomical type stuff. So so if you're interested again in that type of thing, you might want to check that out. So it has like contributions from Jerry Oltion and Will McCarthy, from Mike Brotherton, Mary Robinette Kowal, and Jeffrey Landis, and people like that. So it's pretty cool. It's got more stuff about black holes and killer asteroids and other topics like that. So definitely worth checking out as well.
All right. Well, and so you mentioned Lightspeed, and you have an announcement sort of along those lines, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So, I've been mentioning at the top of the show that I'm the editor of Lightspeed and Fantasy Magazine, and Fantasy Magazine. While I took over Fantasy Magazine back in October, this month, March, marks the first my first issue as editor that you can read. So, it came out March 1st, and so you could buy, it came out on March 7th, so you can buy the ebook now. And if you go to the website at fantasy-magazine.com, you can read some of the stories. It's like Lightspeed, where we publish one story every week. Fantasy is going to publish on Monday, whereas Lightspeed publishes on Tuesday. But we publish a story every week along with the related nonfiction, some sort of article that plumbs some other aspect of the story. And then that stuff's all available online for free. And or else you can buy the ebook version at the beginning of the month and get the whole thing right then. And Fantasy also has a podcast like Lightspeed does. So if you want to listen to some stories there, you can also subscribe to that podcast and listen.
All right, and so I think that's our show. And once again, we're very happy now to be sponsored by Audible.com. So if you want to give Audible a try, you can go to audiblepodcast.com/geeksguide. And sign up for a free trial subscription. You get a free audiobook. There's no commitment. And or just go to our website at geeksguideshow.com and click on one of the ads there. It'll take you to the page. And of course, there's also just a donation button there. If you want to just send us a donation, we would really appreciate it. And of course, we really appreciate it too if people go to iTunes and give us 5 stars or write a review. We're up to 40 star ratings and 13 reviews, and we really appreciate everyone who's done that. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of IO9. For this episode's show notes, to subscribe to this podcast, or for more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.